Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Talks are underway for a potential fight between Joseph Parker and his fellow New Zealander Junior Fa. And this is not the first time that the pair have been discussed as potentially having a fight, but they've opened up negotiations for a possible fight in the middle of 2020. So New Zealand media reporting that the talks have begun, and I'll get to some quotes that are in this article from the New Zealand Herald you can see here on screen, and then a few thoughts, because I'm not sure if this has enough oomph and impetus at the moment to really sort of give the payday that Junior Fa's team in particular would like for a fight with Joseph Parker, Fa the number 2 New Zealand heavyweight currently. So the article says discussions have begun on a Kiwi heavyweight blockbusting fight between Joseph Parker and Junior Fa, potentially to be held in Auckland in the middle of the year. The rival factions will hope the fight lives up to the last truly high-profile local boxing scrap, the Showdown dubbed the fight of the century between David Tua and Shane Cameron. It still holds the record for the highest pay-per-view numbers in New Zealand. And I think that's something around 85,000 from memory. And it goes on to say, and this is a key point I want to touch on in my thoughts a little bit later on, the key to the popularity of that fight at Mystery Creek in 2009, won by Tua via a devastating round 2 knockout, was the rivalry that built between the pair, and a Parker v Fa fight could generate similar intensity. Both are New Zealand born, with Parker a former world champion of Samoan descent and the unbeaten Fa of Tongan descent. Now, I think that is the reporter taking a few liberties there in terms of, the rivalries and how it could be generated, but I'll come to that later. But it goes on to detail they fought 4 times in the amateurs, they split wins, 2 apiece, etc. And remembering it, Joseph Parker and Junior Fa have featured on the same card before. When Parker fought Alexander Flores, a confidence win back in the end of 2018, it featured Junior Fa on the undercard. He fought Rogelio Omar Rossi, took him out in a round or two, half a round it might have been, and that was meant to sort of build up a potential rivalry with Parker. And even at the time, they said, and this was Kevin Barry very mercilessly said that Fa's record was trash. Maybe not those exact words, but he said he had nothing on it and he needed to do more to get a Joseph Parker fight. And that they had considered having Fa for that fight at the end of the year, but he simply wanted too much. And reports at the time suggested somewhere around $500,000. And this is where we'll come to the quotes from David Higgins and also Mark Cadell, who's Junior Fa's manager. So Higgins manages Joseph Parker. He says, "We have made an early start on discussions on a possible blockbuster in Auckland. David Tua vs Shane Cameron remains a record breaker, and hopefully this one would also capture the public's imagination." And just to interject here, that was an event that Higgins put on. So that was his big foray into sort of the world of boxing in terms of having a big pay-per-view like that. And that was well before he got Joseph Parker into a stable that he would eventually have Jeff Horn in as well with Dean Lonergan at Duco. But he says, he goes on to say, "It makes a lot of sense. Junior is unbeaten and ranked number 6 in the world by the WBO, while Joseph is ranked number 2. A lot of people back Fa. Obviously, as Joe's manager, I think he would be the favourite, but Fa is still a big unit." So he's really going on sort of full promoter mode there. And then Fa's manager Mark Cadell says, "We'd always be happy to do that fight, but the money would have to be right." Then the story notes it could be a sticking point, and it has been a sticking point so far, with Cadell further down saying, "We have other options for the middle of the year. So Eddie," and that's Eddie Hearn, "is going to have to make a meaningful offer to Lou." That's Lou DiBella. So Junior Fa is a Lou DiBella promoted fighter. And he says, "I know they spoke a day after Joseph's fight in Texas." And Eddie Hearn did state publicly after the fight that he was looking potentially at a New Zealand-based fight for Joseph Parker in the middle of the year. And Higgins, he also says, "We could make that fight happen next, but the numbers would have to work. There are other options on the table." And just further up here, it sort of details that Junior Fa would be happy for a similar share of the revenue that Parker enjoyed in his unification defeat to Anthony Joshua, about 34%. Okay, so there's a number of things with this story that I don't want to say don't make sense, but maybe the narrative on some of these things is just being stretched a little bit. My take on this, living in New Zealand and being pretty, ear to the ground in terms of what's going on. I mean, the thing is here, there's not a lot of demand as I see it for that fight at the moment. Kevin Barry and David Higgins all the way back in 2018 said Junior Fa had to do more, and since then, and if we just go over to Junior Fa's box rec, he's done a bit more, but probably not enough to really sort of raise his profile to the level that they would like to have that sort of interest in this sort of fight. So we fought Neufeld Owatara, Dominic Gwynn and Devin Vargas in 2019. And Dominic Gwynn dropped him there, and Devin Vargas, that was a much tougher fight than it probably should have been. But, Junior Fa showed some things in that fight, and he's still developing and currently 19-0. But a fight with Joseph Parker is a different kettle of fish to the likes of fighting Devin Vargas, Dominic Gwynn, and Neufeld Owatara. I mean, I would probably hazard a guess that Shawndale Winters, who Joseph Parker just fought, and that was considered a mismatch by most, that that Winters would probably beat all three of these opponents at this point. Maybe it'd be a tougher scrap with Devin Vargas, but I think Winters would have a pretty good go at these fighters that Fa fought in 2019. And they've said it themselves, the Duco camp back in 2018, that Fa needed to do more, that his profile wasn't at the level that it really was. But I'll get into a couple of things that I wanted to pick up from the story itself, because when they start making comparisons between David Tua and Shane Cameron, I'm not really sure that this fight is near those sorts of levels of expectation and fans wanting to see the fight. Because at the time, Shane Cameron, back in the mid to late 2000s, was relatively well known in New Zealand, basically a household name. He'd done some things in the sport of boxing. Obviously, David Tua had been a household name since the 1992 Olympics, where he won a bronze medal. So Tua and Cameron were known quantities, whereas the difference here is that Junior Fa is not so much a known quantity, not a household name, whereas compared to what Cameron was as the B-side in that fight to David Tua. And one of the things that really did develop through that rivalry between David Tua and Shane Cameron, that built up over a number of years. And a part of it was the management going back and forth. And Shane Cameron's manager, Kenny Rainsfield, was a big part of that, talking all sorts of smack. And it became quite nasty, and it was a big part of the build-up, the trash talk. I mean, remembering these guys have been potentially, Joseph Parker and Junior Fa, on a collision course for a number of years now, because they have been pro and, for some years, etc. But there is no real rivalry or beef, as it were, between the pair. They're both really nice guys, and that's just not kind of in their DNA to sort of just talk smack for the sake of it. Remembering the sort of trash talk Joseph Parker was using a few years ago when he's trying to land the Anthony Joshua fight. As soon as he got the fight, he sort of said, look, I just said that because it was, I needed to say that because we were trying to land the fight, but I didn't mean it. So it kind of undermined, his original trash talk. But the build-ups to this fight, if it ever gets made, and Tua Cameron, very different. I'm not really sure if the managers sort of talking trash back and forth, David Higgins and Mark Cadell, is going to be enough. At the moment, there just needs to be a bit more in terms of the performance from Junior Fa in his next couple of fights to build up his stock, not only in the heavyweight division, but with casual fans, because casual fans don't really know who Junior Fa is. And that's not, no disrespect to Fa, because he is a great guy and he has been, tracking his course in the heavyweight division. But right now he is flying way under the radar. So when they talk about, they would like to sort of put it on, but it's for the right money, and they mention, this is in the article, the 34%, for example. If you have that fight and it's 2-1, for Joseph Parker, and effectively they've spoken about before, or the media has cited $500,000 as a figure that they'd be looking for the Fa camp, that's $1.5 million in revenue that you'd have to generate. And if the interest at this point is not great for a pay-per-view, then how is it ever going to generate the money that they would want? It would be a massive gamble going into it. And could you really give Junior Fa a guaranteed, say, $400,000 or $500,000 and hope to get it back on a pay-per-view? I mean, maybe Eddie Hearn is willing to come in with some DAZN money, say $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, and say, this is what we're going to give you. And obviously, if Joseph Parker beat Junior Fa, Fa is currently ranked in the WBO. It helps solidify Joseph Parker's ranking in the WBO, which is currently at number 2. I mean, this fight is going to happen at some point. It always seems like it's a logical domestic fight to have in New Zealand between these two guys that do have some history. But I'm just not convinced it happens next because of the sort of money that everyone involved wants to have. Just not sure it happens next. But what do you make of this? Drop a comment. Loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. I'm out.